We're going to go ahead and get started. We do have enough committee members here to have a quorum, so we go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the March 30th, 2017 Budget Committee as we kick off the budget process. Do I hear a woohoo or anything like that? No. And of course, I want to welcome everyone. This is Mule Day week, so happy Mule Day week. First, let the minutes reflect that I am present, a member of the committee. Mr. Dudley is present, Mr. Moore is present, and Mr. Pennings is present, all committee members. And we also have Mr. Beaver, Ms. Morency, and Ms. Kinzer. All right, proceeding on, looking at our proposed agenda. We didn't get the minutes attached to the package that we received, so we'll strike that from the agenda so that we can look at those minutes prior to the meeting. And then also, I'm going to add a section under new business. It's going to be the new section A. We're going to review our current fiscal budget, the 16-17 fiscal budget, to kind of look at where we're at right now, and then we'll look in the future and try to start doing some future projections. So we'll add that to the agenda as well. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda as revised? All right, got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Dudley. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, ready to vote. All right, since it's the only vote that we're going to have tonight, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, so we let the minutes reflect it is unanimous. All right, moving on into our agenda. What tonight we're going to do is just look at a big picture standpoint of our budget so we can again, look at things from a general standpoint. In future meetings, we'll start getting into the weeds as far as specifics, but tonight is more like an orientation. So my goal is to keep our meeting to 1 hour. That is our goal. And we're going to set a max time of 2 hours. So at 8 o'clock, we'll all turn into pumpkins, and our meeting will be over at 8 o'clock. So, but to get through the agenda, the first thing we're going to talk about under new business is, and again, we do not have the minutes to review, so we'll skip over that, is looking at our current 16-17 budget. Again, we need to kind of figure out where we're at right now. And one of the things that we need to look at, I think, is, my understanding is, as far as our BEP money from the state, we actually, during our current fiscal year that we're in right now, 16-17, we've actually received some additional BEP money. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Mr. Parliament, as to what extra money that we're getting right now in this fiscal year.
I'm not sure what the total is, but we've already received, I believe, $568,000. We've received that check from the state for BEP. We have not done a budget amendment with that. That will be coming at the next board meeting.
Okay, so that's actually one thing that we as a board are going to have to take a look at is during, and again, the process going forward, we're going to be looking at the 17-18 future budget, but our current budget, we've got some additional state funding, and we may want to look at doing some amendments to our current budget to utilize some of that funding. And I understand the superintendent may be making some proposals as far as how to utilize those funds. And maybe, Mr. Parley, maybe you can just explain to the committee just a little bit why we're getting some additional, why the state's sending us extra checks this year.
Not a problem. Well, we have increased enrollment. More students means more money from the state. So, a combo work between what Ron Woodard is doing, making sure that every student is checked and updated in the EIS system, that's the state reporting database system, in addition to more students coming into our system. So that's why we received the BEP money this year. And consequently, what Eric Parliament's going to go through is we've already received notification we're going to be receiving additional BEP money for next year as well. So, we'll be reflecting that during the budget presentation.
Okay. And so I think it may be helpful for the committee to go ahead and have an understanding of what's happening right now, because that's actually going to change some of our revenue projections as far as state revenue for the 17-18 budget. And some of those increased projections are not because the governor's planning on increase in funding. It's just because our enrollment numbers are improving. And so just because the numbers are changing, we can predict with pretty reasonable certainty that we're actually going to receive some additional funding from the state next year, even if the governor didn't do anything.
Yeah, we've already received those numbers from Mayor Andersky with the state, as well as a recommendation on what to go ahead and budget. It's about $1.1 million additional revenue from the state. So she said, go ahead and budget 75% of that, and we'll wait till July to see what actually comes in. But she said, you're good to budget 75%.
All right, so we'll come back to that in a moment when we talk about our future budget. But yes, Mr. Dudley.
When you're talking about the additional money, BEP money we've got, can that money be utilized to replenish what we robbed from our maintenance fund? Go towards any of that?
Yeah, those monies cannot be used for capital funding. They can be used for the regular instructional program. So teacher salaries, we're looking at the diploma laptops, that's an option. Instructional supplies for students, those are things that we can use.
Okay, even the money for additional students can't go towards?
No, ma'am. Or no, sir. Sorry, Mr. Dudley. My apologies. I was looking at Ms. Morency. No, sir, we cannot use that for capital.
All right, but it is something, Mr. Dudley, that we're going to have to take a look at as a board, and the superintendent is going to make some proposals as to our current fiscal year that we're in, if we're going to do some amendments, and what we're going to do with that funding. All right, so also let's talk about the present right now, the current fiscal year we're in, 16-17. And it gets a little bit confusing when we start talking about these numbers, 16-17, 17-18. So what the term I'll use quite a bit is our current fiscal year and then our future or next year's fiscal budget. Another thing that we need to take a look at is our current, what is happening with our fund balance. And Mr. Parliament, I think we all have a decent understanding of what fund balance is, but maybe you can just give us a little bit from an accounting standpoint what a fund balance is.
From my limited exposure to this, fund balance is basically excess funds that are left over at the end of the year. So it's additional revenue or savings and expenses that go into fund balance at the end of the year.
So when we set a budget, if we spend less than what we budgeted, then there may be a balance left over that would go into that fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
That's correct.
And if we get more revenue than what we anticipated or what we budgeted, that's an additional way that fund balance could increase.
That's correct.
But as far as that money that is either we're spending less or we're getting more revenue, from a budgetary standpoint, that money's not available to us until the books close in the fiscal year that we're in.
That's correct. I mean, what I've reported up to this point is a fund balance as of the audited date of 6/30/16, which was last fiscal year. So anything that we're anticipating or that we have already know that we have in excess for fund balance, we really can't use until July 1 going forward.
And it does get a little bit confusing, and the best analogy that I've found is in our current fiscal year, so again, we're in the 16-17 fiscal year, it's as though we have a checking account. And more money may be going into the checking account. We may not be spending as much money in the checking account. And so we may start seeing that, hey, we're actually developing a balance in our checking account. But the thing is, as far as the state is concerned, and as far as the budgetary standpoint is concerned, we do not have access to that money until the end of the year. And at the end of the year, then that money rolls in kind of like a savings account.
That's correct.
Then we can actually spend it. So it's more like wish money or hopeful money when it's in the checking account, but then once it goes into the savings account, then it's something that we can do, and that happens at the end of the year. And some of that makes sense because if we look at our own cash flow, our own checking accounts, if we looked at our checking account at the first of the month when we get our deposit, it may look pretty good. But if we ran out and spent all that money, we'd be in trouble, right, even though there's a large balance, because we know that more bills are coming in. So the state is kind of like, okay, until you get done with your budget year, you can't really utilize that yet. But as this year has been progressing, Mr. Parliament, you've been looking at the books. Have we been spending less than what we budgeted?
We are currently spending, We're running at a run rate between 3 and 4 million less than our total budget.
Okay. And are we actually getting more revenue than what we budgeted as far as revenue?
We are significantly above budget in revenue, both from sales tax and property tax.
All right, so now you've prepared something for management purposes, looking at the numbers at the end of February. And I think if you don't mind, could you maybe provide that to the committee so that they can look at this information? Yeah.
That way we can start talking.
And
This-
everybody needs to be sitting down while they look at this. All right. Now, when we're looking at these numbers, big disclaimer, and you may want to put this on the top,
Right.
is these are projections. These are looking at what is occurring right now, and these numbers could change, so we can't get too excited. But it is something to be able to give us an idea of what may be available at the end of this fiscal year. So at the end of June, it would be June 30th of this year. So, Mr. Parliament, you break this down in your report and it looks like as far as revenue, you've got a section on what that revenue is above as far as what we budgeted. And then you've also got expenditures, and you've given a breakdown of where you believe that our expenditures are actually less than what we budgeted. Excuse me. And then you got, at the bottom, we're going to look at these numbers, the current fund balance available. That would be the number that when we close last year's budget, the 15-16 budget.
Correct.
That's what was left over. That was what went into the savings account.
Right, and let me explain that $5.4 million number. That is a net number after the Keys money was pulled out and the capital expenditures money that was encumbered was pulled out. So those numbers are already pulled out to be able to use throughout 16 and 17 and left an unallocated or uncommitted $5.4 million in fund balance. So
Okay.
everything that was budgeted for last year for Keys and things like that, those monies were already set aside for those purchases. So that's not coming out of this $5.4 million. The way it shows on the financials is basically not unallocated, but unspoken for, yeah. So
Okay, let me make sure I'm understanding. So the first line where you've got 5.4 fund balance at, this would be the end of last fiscal year on June 30th, 2016. That 5.4 figure, that's the total amount of the fund balance.
no, that's the net amount after the Keys money and capital expenditures were pulled out.
Okay,
So the actual fund balance was approximately 9 million, 8 to 9 million, maybe a little bit more than that. I don't have the exact number.
okay. So you're saying that the figure may have been larger, but there's some money that's kind of been earmarked for
That's
certain
correct.
purposes?
Correct.
Okay. And so the remaining amount would be that 5.4?
That's
That would have
correct.
went in, been available at the close of business on June 30th, 2016? Yes.
Layman's terms, after the bills were paid, as of 6/30/17, we had a fund balance of 55467.
In layman's terms, after the bills were paid and at 6/30/16, you had a fund balance of around 9 million. And then we committed 2.9 million for capital expenditures and 2.9 million for Keys, I believe. Those were round numbers. So once you pulled that out of that available fund balance, that left an uncommitted amount of 5.4 million.
Thank you.
Yeah, in layman's terms, the bills had been paid, but then we also had this other set of bills that just hadn't got, it's still in the mail coming to us. We knew they were coming. Yeah, right. All right, so, Mr. Parliament, dropping down the second number, where you say additional revenue for 16-17, this is what, right now, this is as the end of February.
Correct.
This is what, through February, we've got more revenue than what we budgeted,
That's correct.
what we estimated.
And this is where we need to use a little bit of caution because I'm still trying to figure out how the trustee posts this revenue. So this is as of February 28th. This number can change a little bit. more than likely will change a little bit, but as of the end of February, we are $10.5 million above what we budgeted last year in revenue. We've taken in that much more.
Okay. And then as far as our expenditures through the end of February, we have spent, that next line is how much we've spent less than what's budgeted so
That-
far.
that's
We're
correct.
not through the end of the fiscal year yet, but
That's
that's,
correct.
if we could close the books February
If you
28th.
drew a line in the sand, that's
But we
where we
can't
would
really
be.
do that.
Right.
So again, everybody just needs to caution themselves that these are estimates as far as, or these are numbers now, these numbers could fluctuate.
And this is really designed to say, this is where we are at a point in time. When we start talking about the 17 and 18 budget, that's when you start projecting what's going to happen based upon what has already happened. So there's a little bit of difference in how you look at that. This is just where we are at one point in time.
Okay. But that, so when you add all that up, that below number, that 20 number,
Yes.
I'm not gonna say it out loud. That's the number that if we could close the books on February 28th, that's what would go into fund balance. But that does not go into fund balance until after June 30th.
Correct.
And what you're explaining is we could still have some ups or downs in March, April, May, and June. And so
Correct.
that number could change. And so we just need to, I don't know how many times to repeat that, this number could change, but this gives us some idea that there could be some additional money available to us when the books close on June 30th. And why this is important, this helps us to understand when we start looking at our 17, 18 budget that the director or superintendent is proposing to us. Part of that is built in to utilize some of this funding that's going to be available. So this is where this comes into play. Now, again, the state says that even though you have the money in your savings account, the state basically mandates that we keep a rainy day fund of 3% of what our operating budget is.
That's correct.
And so after you take out that 3%, that's the bottom number that would be available right now, if theoretically, if we could close the books right now.
17 million would be what is available right now.
Okay. And so some of that funding may be available for some of the direct superintendent's one-time key requests that we're going to be looking at, and may be available for some of our capital or maintenance needs possibly.
Correct.
So, all right, so let's, we've talked about where we're at right now. So, Mr. Parliament, let's talk about the future. Again, let's look at kind of the big picture first, though, of the budget that you all are proposing for the 17-18
Okay.
year.
Let's talk about revenue first, because that basically is the driver for everything. What you see here, this whole spreadsheet is basically a 10-year historical look back for revenue and expenses, but primarily we're looking at revenue. So what you see is a year-over-year increase or decrease in each one of these line items in revenue. What I've done down here, and a lot of this is more because we're asking for approximately $4 or $5 million more in funding this year than last year based upon the revenue. We kind of tried to figure out especially for the county commission, how are we going to explain that? So what we've done is we've taken in columns AA and AB, you have actual revenue that has come in this year from July 1st of 2016 through the end of February, through the end of 2/28. The last 4 months of the year, March, April, May, and June, I have estimated exactly what came in for that same time frame in 2016. No increases or anything. It's just the straight numbers that happened a year ago. And that brings us to an estimated revenue of $94 million, a little over $94 million is where we're looking like we're going to end up at the end of the year. As you can see, from a local tax standpoint, that's a little over a 3% increase. And then from a state standpoint, that's almost a 4.5% increase in revenue. And those are the two big numbers. So what I've done, if you move over to the next couple of columns, I've taken the 10-year average percent increase year over year. So for local revenue, we have averaged over the last 10 years a 3.5% increase year over year in revenue. If you take that all the way down, that gives you, if we were just to say, let's just take our 10-year average and ask for that, budget that as a revenue number, we would be asking for $97.1 million in revenue. To help sell that a little bit, what we've done is take our current budget and say, we're not going to ask for the 10-year average. We're going to ask for exactly what happened this year. And I think the explanation for that is, if you look at just the last 3 or 4 years, everything has continued to go up at a pretty consistent pace. So I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility to say the same thing's going to happen next year. Sales tax is still going to go up, BEP is still going to go up, and state revenue is still going to go up. So what we've done is, instead of saying, give us the average of the last 10 years, just give us what we had last year plus our additional BEP money. So that's what's in the last 2 columns there. That's why you see a 0% increase in our draft budget for the future year, 17-18, to what happened this year. The only increase is what we mentioned earlier, and that's the BEP money that we know we're going to get, the 75% of the 1.1 million. So that was an additional $836,000 that we put in the revenue budget for this year. So instead of asking for 97.1 million, we're basically budgeting at a rate of 95.1 million, or $2 million less than what we could conceivably argue we could get.
All right, and this is the difficult part of setting a budget is, I guess in a ideal world, we would budget our revenue according to what we reasonably anticipate that revenue to be.
That's correct.
Okay.
But it's hard to do that.
Well, and that affects our funding body because they see that substantial increase. But Mr. Parlin, let me ask you, looking at the numbers, the revenue that's been coming in this year from local sales tax, from state BEP money, if you were just going to tell us, what do you conservatively believe our revenue would be next year, what number would that be?
I think if you look back, you could conservatively estimate that we could grow that revenue number by 1 or 2% across the board. That's what the last 10 years historically shows. But that's why we've even gone a little bit more conservative and said, we're not going to increase it at all. We're going to keep it where it's at from this year.
Right, but let me ask you, if, again, from your expertise, if you were really going to set a budget according to what you believe our revenue is going to be next year, would it be this 97.1 million?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
a conservative number.
Yeah, because most of the time, I mean, it can be a little deceiving to look 10 years back, especially when you're looking at things like sales tax revenue and property tax revenue, because things are a lot different now than they were 10 years ago. But if you look at even the last 5 years, it supports these increases in numbers. So,
Okay, so this 97 million total that and we're looking at column AD, this is using the 10-year average, that $97.1 million figure, that would be based upon historical, not just pulling a number out of the air, that's historical. We know our actual revenue is increasing by a certain percent each
Right.
year. And that's the number that, if we were really going to be accurate, that's what we would set our budget at.
correct.
Okay. But what you're saying, as far as what your office is proposing, that we set a budget as far as what our revenue is going to be, to set a more conservative number, which is this 95.1 million.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the way I look at it is, if you're going to budget what's in column AD, you're basically banking that everything's going to happen the way it's happened the last 3, 4, or 5 years. And that's not necessarily a conservative estimate. So I think what's in column AG is a much more conservative estimate to what's going to happen.
Okay, and that number, the 97.1 million that you all are proposing to set as a revenue budget, that's with an assumption that our economy would basically flatline. In other words, it's basically what we are going to be receiving in revenue this year.
That's correct.
We're making that assumption that nothing changes. The
Right.
economy doesn't increase, the economy flatlines, and the only thing that comes in next year is what the same thing what we received this year.
That's correct.
That's where we're set, you all have based the proposed revenue budget.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, also, we need to go back and look at the state where you all are increasing the state number.
On the other sheet where we kind of break that down, that 56 million, it shows a 1.5% increase over this year. That's purely the $837,000 in BEP money for, where we already know that we're going to get 1.1 million. She said budget 75% of that. Because it could go up or down a little bit.
Yeah.
But you're assured to get that.
Yeah, at least that. And she said, based on what comes in July, you may have to come back again and budget again, just like we're doing with the 568,000, because it's probably gonna go up. But she said right now, just do 75% as a safeguard.
All right, so if you all can go back to that particular where it shows, I think you have a note of that 75%.
Right.
All right, so we're looking at state of Tennessee line, what you all are proposing for the 17-18 budget. That's with what, that increase comes from what the state has already told us we're gonna receive in BEP funding next year.
That's correct.
Just because our enrollment numbers are changing,
That's correct.
okay? And we don't know yet what the governor, ultimately, they're working that out, what, there may be some additional increases that they may increase everybody on.
So the governor has kind of stated at this point that he wants to fully fund the BEP. Right now, the BEP, as you guys know, is only funded at 70%. The words fully fund kind of give me a little bit of consternation. I don't know what he means by fully fund. One of the things, as you guys know, last week, thinking back a week now, I was testifying before the House Administration and Planning Committee on one of the budget documents that Governor Haslam has put into place is giving every single school in the state of Tennessee 3 RTI specialists. As you guys know, you funded 13 part-time RTI specialists last year. You'll see the increases that we made as a result of those 13 positions in our school system. But that's just one of the things in his budget at a cost of $246 million that he's put in his budget.
Okay.
So we don't know what's going to happen yet.
But these numbers, what you all are putting down for an increase of state revenue, that has nothing to do with
No.
what the governor may or may not do
No.
this year.
Nope.
For their budget. This is just based upon the fact the state has already sent us a check for additional BEP funding for enrollment already.
Yes.
And they've already told us you're gonna receive additional BEP funding next year just because your enrollment numbers have changed.
Yes.
And they told us to use a conservative figure of 75% of what we really are probably gonna get.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the 75% at 1.1, I noticed that you all increasing the state revenue by 1.4. Explain that to me.
That's an increase of 1.4 over the budget for last year. What we've done is take the 75% over actual for this year.
Okay, okay.
So what we
So we're
projected to
still
be-
like right now operating under the 16-17 budget is a lower number than what we've actually
Correct.
received. I got you.
Correct.
Okay, all right. All right, so let me open the floor for any questions on the superintendent's proposed draft budget as it relates to revenue. Yes, Ms. Morency.
We're looking at property reassessments in 2018. Property value in Murray County, I know, has risen, so would you anticipate that that would be an increase for our revenue?
I would assume that if they're doing a reassessment in 2018, yes, that probably.
It's every 4 years. We're working on 2014 right now. So.
Right. So if they do another one in 2018, I wouldn't anticipate that taking effect until the 18-19 or 19-20 budget,
Okay.
if that's when the assessment takes place.
And I think technically when they do the reassessment, I'm not an expert on this, but when they do the reassessment, they actually try to figure out a way to make where the tax revenue stays the same. And so sometimes that forces the tax rate to go down. So it may not necessarily change that, I think. I'm not 100% on that. But we do have more property, I think, that's more probably taxpayers that are paying in. I think we're seeing.
Yeah, we can probably rest assured that they're not going to calculate it in a way where that revenue number goes down, so.
Now, Mr. Paulus, this may be good. You can give us a breakdown where you all show the increase on the local tax. You can give us a breakdown of what that really means, like how much you all are increasing as far as property tax and what is actually sales tax. Can you show that real quick?
Yeah, here's a breakdown of those numbers. And this is again, this is actual through the end of February, and then we've dropped the 4 months of 2016 in to come up with the budget
All
number,
right,
so.
but here's the important line. Okay, so on 4110 property tax, our current budget is 21.3 million for property tax, correct?
Correct.
All the increase that you all are proposing on the property tax line is 21.9. Is that correct?
That's
Okay,
correct.
so this should not have any effect on the tax rate. This is just basically utilizing what we anticipate is going to be coming in this year to project out for next year.
That's
So
correct.
that should not affect the tax rate. This
No.
is the thing that causes our funding body the most nervousness. Where we are actually increasing as far as what we're asking for to utilize for our revenue is more on sales tax. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's $4.5 million increase on sales tax. Well, it's actually,
No, it's not 4.5, but like a little.
I'm sorry, it's
1.6.
1.7 million, 1.6, 1.7 million.
Okay, so that's where a lot of, as far as this increase, as far as our revenue budget, that's where most of that is coming from. And that's based upon the fact that we are seeing a substantial spike in sales tax revenue.
And I would say that's probably the more, that's probably the number that could change, that could be more fluid than the property tax number based upon if the economy tanks, people are not going to be buying as many things, so that could affect that number. But the assumption is that the economy stays flat.
Okay.
That's what that's based on.
All right, so any other questions on the revenue side of things? All right, so let's go to, since you've got this kind of master list up, let's look at expenditures.
Okay.
So you all are proposing that we set a budget of 91.4 on revenue, and you all are proposing an expenditure of 91.4.
No, that's this year's budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you all are asking to set a budget of 95.1 in revenue and asking to set a budget of a little less than 95.
Right.
Well, 95.09.
95.2 to 95, 1.5. So we basically set the budget at right now approximately $50,000 less than what we project revenue to be.
Okay, so that's actually an increase as far as expenditures of about 3.6 from last budget, last year.
I've got it here right at 4%, so.
Okay, 3.6 million is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
sorry, yes.
All right, so, and this may be helpful when we get into some of these other documents that you all have submitted to us. This 95 million in expenditures, that includes what we're going to be looking at on the superintendent's budget, or Key's budget, as far as the GP things that he's requesting. That's built into that number.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
What's built into the GP part of the keys is included in this number.
Okay, so we're going to be getting into that in a moment, what's included in there. And understand that there's also some step raises that are included as well. Maybe you can explain that, Mr. Parliament.
From my understanding, I mean, across the board, there are step raises that, are those yearly or every year? So we've taken all of that into account in this. The only thing that has not been taken into account is any other raises that either the board or anybody else decides that they want to add to this. So everything else has been factored into this.
Okay, so the big numbers of this increase, the 3.6, that includes the superintendent's key budget items that we're going to be looking at, includes the step raises. It also includes some other increases, and but I understand that you have got detailed sections that explains all of
That's
those
correct.
increases.
And let me back up to give you a little bit of background on how we've kind of gotten to this point from a budget standpoint. I'm not sure how this was kind of put together in previous years, but what I really wanted to do when I came in, and it's been a great learning experience for me, but to involve all these different areas in their budget. So we started sitting down and really, they had a much bigger hand in coming up with these numbers than I think what they've ever had previously, which I think has in turn given everybody a lot better understanding of what's going into these numbers. So they've come up with their own salary numbers, benefit-related numbers. They've pretty much done everything as it relates to their individual departments, so.
Okay. All right, so we're not going to dig into all that tonight, but I just want the committee and the members to be aware that if they want a more detailed breakdown of those increases, you'll see in Mr. Parliament's spreadsheet those little tabs. I guess if you
Correct.
click on any of those tabs, you can see those individual budgets and where the increases are, correct,
That's
Mr. Parliament?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So we may come back to that at a later time to get into a little bit more in the weeds and a little bit more in the details, but I just want to point that out for the committee members and board members. Yes, Mr. Parliament.
Stuff that's on the big screens on our iPads.
It is. Should be one of the attachments that,
There's another one under draft presentation budget.
yes, I think it's that last attachment.
Right.
Yes. All right, we can look into that a little bit more after the meeting if any members are having trouble finding all that information. But that information should be available. I was able to access it when I went to the agenda earlier today and pulled that up. Maybe just take a little bit of playing around with it a little bit. So, all right. All right, let's look at the part of this expenditure budget that is included within that increase is the keys budget. And Mr. Superintendent, maybe you can go ahead and pull up that keys document so we can take a look at that.
Before we start out, one of the first things I wanted to pull up, if you'll see in your e-meetings, is it's a PDF. Basically, to this point, this is an executive summary of where we currently are with the keys budgeting that you guys did last year. And you'll remember, we had about $2.4 million in requested additional funding. We've been doing checks every 3 to 4 months. We have one final check to do before the end of the year, but this is information that Dr. Preninger was able to pull for us so far. So looking at the upper left-hand corner, one of the first things she pulled out is how are our 13 RTI interventionists doing? What's happening in the individual schools with the money that you budgeted for what we call these 120-day contracts? And so going back, if you'll remember, the 120-day contract is an option where we can get retired teachers to come back into our system, and that does not impact their retirement. So we're able to pull in experienced teachers and then get them to work with our students that are struggling most academically in what we call RTI, which is response to intervention. We have 3 tiers in a response to intervention framework. We have tier 1, which is normal classroom instruction, tier 2, which is below grade level, and tier 3, which is significantly below grade level. Could somebody go down and turn the power on? I plugged in but didn't turn the power on. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So what we were able to do is we were able to pull in those teachers this year, and we were able to, thank you, sir, we were able to start tracking the work that they started to do with individual students. And what you'll notice with the research here is that if you have an interventionist in school, you have an 87% increase in academics by students. So you'll notice that school improvements from tier standing basically grew 26.8% compared with 14.3%, and that's the graph that's on the left. And then a school with dedicated interventionists advanced more than twice as many students than schools that did not request an interventionist last year. So this data right here tells us that students moving from Tier 2 and Tier 3 greatly improved in going down to Tier 1 at an 87% increase. So what that tells us is these 120-day contracts are not just making an improvement in student outcomes, they're making a dramatic improvement in student outcomes. And so just based on this first one, as a superintendent, I'd like to say thank you for funding that in the Keys budget. You made a big difference in kids' lives, especially kids that were struggling academically. And we've seen more schools come back this year and request, if they got one, they wanted two. If they didn't request any, they asked for one. So we have an increase in RTI interventionists. And again, this comes out of fund balance. This does not affect our GP funding. Moving on down, for reading and math, keys 1 through 4 and number 7. You'll see that at the elementary school, we had leveled readers. At Mount Pleasant Middle School, they asked for a TN Ready writing program. We also asked for, some schools asked for something according to math in Key 2, as well as music and arts in Keys 2 and 3. So Mount Pleasant Elementary School added 79 music students, while Marvin Wright added 575. And the end-of-year growth will be measured by a pre- and post-music test in May. So what we did is we organized a mathematics test that was aligned to what they'd be working on in music the entire year to determine the math growth that they would make. And we're going to assess them in May. Again, Spring Hill Elementary School added art students, and we will have a pre- and post test that will be completed in May. Moving down to Keys 2, 4, and 7 with STEM Project Lead the Way in Mechatronics through the GP funding. You guys said, yes, we want to make an investment in Project Lead the Way at all middle schools and high schools, and mechatronics at our 3 largest high schools, Mount Pleasant High School, Central, and Spring Hill. So you'll see that in one specific area, Highland Park asked for money to do a STEM club, and that club has created over 50 STEM projects this year. And then our 10 schools, which are middle school and high schools for Project Lead the Way, we had 766 students engaging in Project Lead the Way curriculum, and 219 students enrolled in mechatronics this year, for a grand total of 985 students this year in direct STEM-related curriculum every single day. Moving down to the bottom, one of the largest areas next to the STEM Project Lead the Way in mechatronics instructors was the program at Cox Middle School, the Catapult program, which was aptly coined Cougar Academy. Going back to, if you'll remember, Catapult, the company, what they do is they work with students psychologically, socially, and academically. It's not a dumping ground. It's an area where these students can receive intense instruction and intense therapy and intense work for them to grow academically, as well as students in the rest of the school to grow academically as well. You'll see that as a result of adding Catapult, there was a 47% reduction in total infractions 1 year over the last. There was a 53% reduction in ISS referrals and a 31% reduction in out-of-school referrals, OSS referrals. That means that more students are in school, average daily membership is up, more money is coming in from the state, and as a result, the academics at Cox have also improved as well. You saw that when we brought Catapult to you about a month and a half ago. You see the academics that are taking place at Cox Middle School. Moving to the upper right-hand corner, a lot of schools last year asked for Chromebooks in order to do more Dreambox and more Mayan at the elementary and middle school level. So we deployed Chromebooks at many schools, and one of the things that we've noticed is a growth in number sense fluency with using Dreambox. So one of the things for RTI that we have to do is we have to take the software program AimsWeb, and we have to assess students to determine where they are, to determine what type of response to intervention they get from the RTI interventionist and also teachers at the school. And one of the things that we found out is for those schools that got Chromebooks and those schools that influenced Dreambox, we noticed that those students at those individual schools, their number sense fluency increased versus the students that didn't. Dr. Preninger initially is causing this a causality or a causal relationship, but she wants to wait until May to determine if there is a causal relationship. But she says right now, it looks like there's going to be a causal relationship between the use of DreamBox and increased students and number sense fluency. Moving down, high school and beyond, keys 5, 6, and 7. We funded some things last year to do some additional ACT administration, ACT readiness programs, online prep, more teacher training, looking at companies and programs such as Pareto with practice books, and then also additional AP teacher training. We won't know the results of this until after students take their AP exams and we get those AP exams and also ACT scores in. But what we're hoping to see, again, is another growth in ACT as we continue to go higher and higher and higher, as we continue to systemically and systematically influence ACT in our individual schools. Moving on down, you guys were able to fund last year an additional instructor for JROTC. As a result of that additional instructor, they are now serving over 100 additional cadets this year that they had to turn away last year because they didn't have enough people. Industry certification and dual enrollment. Hampshire Unit School and Mount Pleasant Middle School increased dual enrollments in industry certs. 73 students at Hampshire Unit School were enrolled in health science and completed their CPR certification this past fall. And then 14 Hampshire students enrolled in turf and landscape certification in 2017. And then the last thing, Mount Pleasant High School, the money wasn't ready last time to impact it in June and July. So as a result, we will have 50 students in a rising freshman camp in the summer of 2017.
All right, thank you, Dr. Marzak. So this presentation, I guess this is looking at what we did last year as far as what we funded last year, and this is kind of a whether we're getting a return on our investment type presentation from
Yes,
last
sir.
year. Okay.
Yes.
All right, so let's transition into looking at what you all are proposing for us going forward in the next year budget.
So reminiscent of what we did last year, we did the exact same thing where principals received their draft budgets, went back to their individual schools. They have their data from Dr. Preninger, who's been working with them on how they're currently doing this year with regards to the keys and other work as well. The principals talked with teachers. Teachers and principals collaborated. They then came back, and we had individual budget meetings during the month of February where they presented to us what they needed to either continue making growth on their keys or to make even greater growth with the keys that they're responsible for. So going back to the document that is reminiscent of the one you had last year, it's exactly the same. It's divided out by keys. It also is divided out by the individual schools. And what we did is once the budget process was over, we went through and looked at the available funding we would have and started to prioritize what we as an office felt was most important while using data and also the available fund balance or the available money we would have. You'll notice like last year, we still have some things in the blue and yellow columns. These are the unfunded areas. These are the unfunded things that schools ask for. One of the things that we did notice that I was really proud about is last year, at the end of the first keys budget in the blue and the yellow, we had an ask of about $12 million is what schools are asking for. If you go down all the way to the bottom, between the blue, yellow, green, and pink, we're noticing a figure of about half that. So what I think was happening is schools started to become more intentional about the things that they were asking for that are specifically aligned to the data that we're pulling and also the work that Dr. Preninger is working with them on how to be systemic and systematic about growth for students. So I'm really proud of the schools for what they did. They became a lot more intentional about the things that they were asking for.
And so, Dr. Marzak, maybe you can
Yeah.
give us an example. So key one, remind us what that is again.
So key one is students reading at grade level by the end of third grade.
So it's addressing reading, and we've got some benchmarks of where we want our kids to be at the end of third grade. And so each one of those, I guess, elementary schools, in the part of their process of proposing a budget to you, they would have to sit around and think about, hey, what are ways we can improve reading where we can reach those benchmarks by third grade?
Yes.
That's what they would brainstorm. They would come up with a proposal, and I guess they would come to your office to talk about what they were proposing, what they were requesting.
Yes.
And so you had, I guess, the big list, the big wish list, but then there's a process of where you, I guess, in meeting with them and asking them questions, whether it was going to be effective or not, you yourself have whittled that list down to things that you are asking the board to fund.
Yes, we as an executive team.
Okay.
So Dr. Hargrove's part of the process, Mr. Breeden, Mr. Gaines, even Mr. Parliament was a part of the process.
So it wasn't just enough if somebody asked for money for a certain purpose, they undergo the questioning of how does that really improve
Yes.
reading? How does that, and how can you maybe measure those sorts of things?
Yes, and we actually had some principals pull some things off the list. They made the executive decision because they realized that it could not impact a key, and kind of pushed back on some teachers to go, this really isn't a wish list process. This is a process where we systemically impact outcomes for kids.
To be focused with our funding and
Yes.
focus on what we're doing. So
Exactly.
the first two columns, just for the benefit of the committee members, these first two columns, that's what did not make the cut, so to speak, right now.
As of yet,
Okay.
correct.
All right, so these are things that, as far as requests, is still over in those columns. What you all are currently proposing to us to fund, it's in these next, the far two columns, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right, and so we're gonna get into, you explaining a little bit to us what the specifics are in a moment, but just so we can see the big picture. Some of these items you're requesting to include in our general purpose budget that we looked at just a moment ago.
Yes, that's the green columns F and G.
All right, so let's go down to the bottom and we'll look at that number, what the total amount is. All right, so that's 1.175 million.
Yes.
That's what is built into that budget we just looked at before with Mr. Parliament, correct, as far as those expenditures? That's
Yes.
included in
Yes.
that, okay.
Yes.
And then in the pink column, or mauve, I'm not sure what color that is.
We'll go with
the total amount
flesh, pink column, that's good.
the total amount of those requests, an amount of 3.3 million,
Yes,
those are one-time expenditures. In other
Yes.
words, we don't have to look for a recurring year to year. This would be a one-time expenditure, and you all are proposing that would be something that we would utilize this fund balance that
Yes.
we're anticipating that we may have some fund balance to be able to utilize for those purposes. So
Yes.
that wouldn't necessarily go to our funding body for any requests. It would just be simply, basically, we would use our savings account towards those.
yes.
Okay.
And just to tell you, just one of the things that we talk to schools about, especially middle schools and high schools, is we had another request for middle schools and high schools said we'd like some more Chromebooks. And knowing the diploma initiative and where the board wants to go and my emphasis on going one-to-one at the middle school and high school level, we didn't put those in the budget because they need to be working with their staffs to convert them over to one-to-one through the diploma initiative, not continuing to fund Chromebooks that they can use for software programs.
Okay. Now, stopping right there as far as that total figure that you all are proposing to use fund balance of 3.3. So going back to what Mr. Parliament provided to us earlier, if these numbers hold true, there would still be a substantial amount of fund balance available after the close of June 30th, 2000 of this year,
Correct.
assuming these numbers hold true.
If those numbers hold true and you take the 3.3 out, there would still be a considerable balance left.
So it may give us some flexibility for capital needs or maintenance needs in our
Yes.
district. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'll share with committee members and also the board members, our funding body, I think originally their thought process was that they were going to have quite a bit of flexibility for capital needs as far as what their debt service is. That's one of the things they look at is, okay, how much money, how much flexibility do I have? I can borrow the money and I can make those payments. Originally, I believe they anticipated having a lot of flexibility. Now I'm getting word that they may not have as much flexibility as they thought, and they may not have any flexibility at all. Now, I don't quite understand how they're, and I'm still trying to figure that out, and I would, Mr. Parley, I mean to discuss with you, I want you to try to get a better understanding of their finances. Maybe you can help us understand it. But that's something that I think we as a board need to be aware of, that, in fact, for cash flow purposes, a lot of times the state delays when we get our BEP funding, and historically, we've actually had to go, and we'll do like a little one-time loan from the county to be able to pay until our BP funding comes in. I've been told that might not even be available this year. Okay, so that's just something we need to be aware of, that some of the flexibility that we thought might be available may not be available, and so some of the fund balance may come in useful for us, but we just need to be aware of that. So anyway, so Mr. Superintendent, if you want to go back, again, we're not going to get into the weeds too much tonight, but maybe you can just break down for us, give us a kind of a highlighted version of what the schools are requesting, maybe by in key 1, key 2. Again, maybe not go through in extreme detail because we can see that in the spreadsheet, but just give us an idea of the types of things that your office is requesting that we fund, either from GP or from fund balance.
So looking back at key number 1, for students reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade, every school that requested an RTI interventionist, we've moved over to the pink. Going back to the data, you saw that that's a high yield strategy. It's gotten some good results. We think those results are going to continue to be the same. One of the things I will highlight over here in the green on row number 25, Riverside Elementary School is losing some of their title funding. So they're also losing some positions. And this is a position that they currently have to work with some of their low-income students. So that's one of the things that we continue to keep in there. That's something that they're going to need as they continue to move on, as they work with students in poverty. Moving on down to key number 2.
So it sounds like, for the most part, in key 1, and that's again addressing reading levels, the big budget numbers are primarily these RTI people that are actually going to be able to help students that are struggling in certain things.
Yes, and also in some schools, you will see Chromebooks for grades 1 and 2. You saw the work that's being done with Dreambox. Kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade is not included as part of the diploma project right now. So that continues to give them more devices for students to be able to access more content. Moving on down to key number 2, that's students. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's
I was
okay.
going to have you explain what key 2 was.
Key 2 is students performing at math on grade level by the end of 4th grade. So you'll see a lot of the same things, RTI interventionists, as they continue to work with students to increase their math fluency. We see a lot of STEM materials and a lot of STEM activities, especially at the elementary school level. We have 2 schools that have requested to implement Project Lead the Way at the elementary school level. They have what's called the Launch Program, and it's kids in kindergarten through 4th grade where they do STEM as part of like a natural rotation. Like you'll have art, you'll have music, you'll have PE. So Baker Elementary School and Marvin Wright have requested to become a Project Lead the Way school. Highland Park has created their own project-based learning rotation. They've created a whole curriculum, a whole plan. It was pretty impressive. They put a lot of time into it. And then also Mount Pleasant Elementary School, going with the STEM and STEAM theme of the Mount Pleasant Arts Innovation Zone, they've created a STEAM position that students in kindergarten through 4th grade will rotate through every single day. And then you see a lot of Chromebooks being moved over for students that are in kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade in order to increase their numeracy fluency or more access to Dreambox, if you will. Key number 3 is students' math and English still on grade level by the end of 6th grade. So you'll see a lot of fund balance requests. Whitthorne Middle School currently has 2 RTI interventionists, 1 for language arts, 1 for math. They've made a lot of growth this year, so they've asked for double of those positions. And there's quite a few kids at Whitthorne Middle School. They have over 900 students. So they need more people to be able to access more things for more students. Culleoka Unit School has done the same as well as Spring Hill Middle School has. Moving on to key number 4, students successfully completing Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade. We see an RTI intervention at Hampshire Unit School, graphing calculators. You saw that last year. That is an ongoing request from schools to be able to give more access to more calculators to more students. We have, moving down to key number 5, that's moving into high school. So that's students meeting all 4 ACT college readiness benchmarks by graduation. So key 5 is a strict ACT focus at each of our individual schools. You'll see a lot of those one-time requests have moved over. So Culleoka Unit School, for example, is asking for someone to strictly work with students on ACT. That person is dedicated to ACT work at the high school level with students. So you can see a lot of those have moved over.
Can I interrupt 1 second?
Yes, you may.
On key 5, why did Mount Pleasant High School not get their interventionist?
That's a good question. I'd say most likely because I didn't see it in the yellow. It was asked for. Is that something we would love to have, but it's not something we have to have? I have no problem moving that over to the pink.
Thank you.
So we'll take care of that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. For key number 6, students financial literacy. Students financially literate by the time of graduation. Last year there was not a single ask for key number 6. This year we actually had schools come in and say there are things that we would like to do with students to directly impact their financial literacy by graduation. So we were able to move quite a few of those over. Key number 7 is students successfully completing advanced placement coursework, dual enrollment, work-based learning, industry certification, and also military preparation by graduation. So we were able to move a lot of those over into the pink column. We're waiting to see what's going to happen with line number 27. With the Jobs for Tennessee Grads program, I'm actually supporting John Dwyer. He's asking for the governor to fully fund Jobs for Tennessee Grads. And so that may be a position that we move over, but at this point we don't need to because he's asking for funding from the governor in the current budget. And it looks like it's pretty favorable at this point. Now down at the bottom, these are all keys. These are things that impact more than just one key. And since we're looking at direct key impactment, if you will, this is a kind of a catch-all that impacts multiple keys or hits across multiple areas. So there were some things we were able to move over. Again, you see Cox Middle School, Cougar Academy is in there as well. The data has been very favorable, and we'd like for them to continue. And in fact, Cox and Whitthorne are actually talking about students from Whitthorne that need Cougar Academy having the ability to go to Cox Middle School. So we're actually looking at expanding that program at Cox Middle School, not just for Cox students. Any questions under all keys? Let's see here. Which one? Where are we going? Numeracy coach? Math coach. That's what they're asking for. So you see the total position changes as well as the total funding in each one of those areas. Moving down, this is the technology area. These are things that Tommy Schuyler brought. Lines number 242 and 243. These were brought to further help the diploma initiative as we continue to roll out devices to students. As we give devices to students and as we start to grow that number, we're going to need more people to troubleshoot and also help out with more hardware and software issues. As well as he's currently doing the technology coach supplements this year out of his own budget. He was able to find the money, but then that gives him the money to do some more supplements. So these are current teachers that help out their current staff members with what we're calling Tier 1 tech support. Printer issues, basic email issues, things that don't require somebody to drive over to fix. One of the things that was requested is that we have a backup network in case we have a catastrophe or some kind of disaster. We currently don't have that. So that's one of the things that Tommy Schuyler has put into the budget for this year, is to create a backup network. Moving down to maintenance and operations. These are things that were asked of schools and also asked Stan Breeden during his budget time for things that we needed to do to further push the work that they're doing with GCA, as well as additional work. So any questions for any of those down there on maintenance and operations? Sure, go ahead. Mr. Breeden?
Dr. Potts has requested she has no place to set up her mechatronics lab. So she has, because they're using the current shop, the only shop building they have, they use for storage for all of their equipment that they take care of grounds like football fields and everything's with. So she's asked for a storage building that she could move all that stuff out of their shop so she could set that shop up for a mechatronics shop. She has no place to put the mechatronics equipment.
We're running out of space at Spring Hill High School. You're welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Morency.
Yes, ma'am.
Stan, is what about the Megatronics building at Mount Pleasant? Is that in the budget to do the work that needs to be done there?
There is nothing in the budget for that. We've been told two different things. Originally, we were told that they were looking to rework that old shop/weight room, and they were seeking a grant to do that. This last week, I've been told by Dr. Brown that they are actually relocating that mechatronics lab into the area where they've been using for Project Lead the Way, and so they're not planning to change that shop over, and that they do not need the space for a mechatronics lab. They've taken care of it with the space that they've got.
Well, actually, I was there when they did the tour, and Dave was there, and Dr. Brown, and they're looking. They need to refurbish both of those because Dr. Brown said they need a classroom and a lab for each one of those programs.
Yeah, we get really conflicting information from Mount Pleasant High School on that. I only got that information from Dr. Brown one day last week. I'm trying to schedule a time to go down there and see Dr. Jackson and try to really figure out what they're doing because, again, I thought we were pursuing the grant to rework. We've been working on putting together pricing information for all the work that would need to be done in that room. But
Well, I mean, if the grant comes in, that's great. But if it doesn't come in, they still need a place to have a mechatronics and
And Dr. Brown told me they were doing that in the existing space that they have, what she called the race car room. That's where they'd be putting the mechatronics lab.
Well, I mean, there's room there. But it has to be reworked.
Yeah, she told me they're building some kind of escape room in the shop. And again, I've got to go look at that because from what she told me, sounds like we're in violation of fire code if they've done that. I've also been told they cut holes in the walls, and we've not approved any of that. So I was unaware of any of that going on there. So I need to go visit Dr. Jackson, find out what's going on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Dudley.
Back to Spring Hill and the outbuilding. You talk about using the current shop space for mechatronics. Well, what about the current shop programs that are being used and supposedly using that same room, which I've been wanting to get the equipment out of there for years because the teachers can't teach because they got all this dead-burn equipment parked in there all the time. The equipment can sit outside. But like I say, the teachers have been limited in being able to use the shop space because it's a catch-all for everything in Spring Hill High School.
And I understand that, Mr. Dudley. I'm going by what Dr. Potts has said. She feels like if we get the storage building built, they can move all that equipment out of there, and then the agriculture class and the mechatronic class could share that shop, is what she told me.
Okay, well, it's not just agricultural equipment, it's more junk.
No, I
piled-
understand. No,
piled in
most of the
there.
equipment in there, I think, is, there's equipment they take care of the football field and the baseball field with. It's a lot of equipment that they use to take care of their sports fields. They have no other place to store those. So I think that, my understanding, that's a big bulk of what's being stored in there.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Penix?
Well, on the whole mechatronics, I mean, the superintendent's been pushing mechatronics, and it's a wonderful program. But then let's make sure that they have decent classrooms to teach the class in. I mean, let's not be teaching mechatronics in a barn. Let's be teaching mechatronics in a classroom that's set up for mechatronics.
Yeah, and we have current requirements according to power that we have to meet for certain machinery that's going to be coming in. So that's one of the things that we're working with on the principals. You know, one of the things we gave principals was more responsibility and more accountability. So we're allowing the principals to kind of drive that a little bit, while also helping them realize that when you change stuff up, that throws his timeline way off. So we're trying to help them understand that, you know, you have flexibility, but you also have to realize how if you change, you impact 6 steps down the road. So be careful. So we're working with them on that.
And we've been trying to, work with the principals, because the principals are trying to say where the classes need. And so, most of the requests that we've got on here have what's come through the principals. Like, for instance, Central High School, we're also working on trying to create a mechatron. We're doing some remodeling within that metal building that existed back. And again, we're doing that through some donations that were done for that. But we think we can create the space through using the donations. So that's, we've just kind of gone with from school to school and said, what do you need? And at Spring Hill High School, Dr. Potts said if we could get a storage building. At Mount Pleasant High School, originally they said the shop, and Dr. Jackson said, think we got this all taken care of with a grant. So we didn't suggest, put anything in the budget because we're going off, he didn't request anything in the budget for that. So we're going off of that. And then at Columbia Central, working with Mr. White, he'd worked with a donor that's supplying that. So that's the three, my understanding, that's the 3 places where we have mechatronics. So that's been our plans for the mechatronic labs at those 3 schools.
Mr. Dudley?
The $100,000 for furniture replacement, is that system-wide, or is that?
Yes, sir, that would be system-wide. We had several requests that came in. If you'll remember back a few years ago, there was a line item in the budget that was under the superintendent's budget, which was $100,000 for equipment replacement, pretty much the superintendent's discretion. That went away during the transitions to the new superintendent, and so we don't have any money to upgrade any furniture. And we had several requests from schools through the budget process for some additional furnishings. And we thought if we could get that, that would put us back to where we used to be budget-wise, and we'd try to meet those requests. We won't be able to meet all of them with that $100,000, but we could at least start working toward that and maybe, work again next year doing that.
Okay, and we've exhausted any furniture we may have in our storage facility.
There's none of the furniture in our storage facility that would meet any of those requests. That's correct.
All right, thank you.
All right, so again, getting back just from a big picture standpoint, is everybody all color coordinated now? We all understand what we're looking at?
Got one thing left,
Yes.
special education.
Okay.
So one of the things that as part of our keys is work-based learning. We have a lot of our students that have special needs that will not be able to participate in advanced placement or dual enrollment courses or even military preparation. But Ms. Ventura, I've been gone for a week. I forgot people's names. Ms. Ventura said, listen, we do have an increasing need for work-based learning. A lot of businesses are reaching out saying we'd like to take some of your students. We have a need, but we don't have enough people to really supervise and train according to work-based learning. So she said, listen, if I could have 5 work-based learning coaches that would hit multiple schools, I could greatly grow key number 7 for our students with disabilities. And we saw that as a high yield, high leverage strategy. And so that's one of the things that we put into the green section was getting work-based learning coaches. And that's the end of the KEYS budget.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Marzak. So again, this is a big picture view of everything. Does anybody have any questions from an expenditure standpoint as far as understanding the general process or the information in general? Yes, Mr. Pennings.
I just have one. So, Dr. Marzak, if I'm looking at this right, in the blue section,
Yes, sir.
these are things you would have liked last year,
Well, these are things that I would have loved to have funded for next year.
right? So, and that totals 1.433 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
And also in the yellow column, these are things that principals said, you know, we would love to have these things, and teachers said we would love to have them. It's not a deal breaker if we don't get it, but it would be great if we could get it. So what we currently have left in the unfunded is about $2.43 million worth of additional requests.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so I think we now hopefully have a general understanding of our revenue and what the expenditure proposals are. If there's no additional questions from a general standpoint, I think we'll move on to the next item of the agenda, just to remind everybody that our future committee meeting, our next committee meeting will be April the 6th, next Thursday at 6 p.m. And then that time, we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds on things. Prior to that meeting, I would ask the committee members and board members to study our revenue numbers. We have this data, we have the historical data, review all that. If you have any questions or if you want some additional information, try to understand where we're coming up with these revenue projections, by all means, get in contact with staff, Dr. Marzak or Mr. Parliament, to get a better understanding on that. And hopefully, if we have a pretty good, firm grasp of our revenue and what we're comfortable with our revenue, that may help the process be a lot easier and a lot swifter. If we're comfortable with the revenue, that may make things much easier as far as what the requests are on the expenditures. If we're not comfortable on the revenue and we want to reduce what we're going to be budgeting for revenue, then we'll have to go then look at the expenditures and try to figure out a process for what we're going to cut. So I do think I would encourage all committee members and board members to review the revenue numbers, make sure that you understand those numbers and try to figure out what you are comfortable with. And then as far as the expenditures prior to our next meeting, of course, we've got the detailed list in the KEYS budget that gives a breakdown of what the superintendent is proposing. I would encourage everyone, if you have any questions about, well, what is this? Well, what is this for? Go ahead and reach out and get in contact with them before the meeting so that we can maybe have a little bit better, you'll have a good handle on that. Of course, we'll be able to ask some additional questions, but we don't want to get too bogged down on trying to figure out some things. We want the process to be as speedy as possible. And then also, just as a reminder, when we go back to and look at the master list, as far as those other increases that are aside from the KEYS budget increases and the step raises, Mr. Parliament has tabs where you can actually go in and look at the details as to what is being proposed to increase. Go ahead and look at that information. If you've got questions, reach out and try to gather as much information as possible. So, with that being said, if there's no other, yes, Ms. Kinzer.
The governor had said part of his budget was to allocate $100 million across the state for teacher raises. At what point will we know what that is? And
That is a very good question, Ms. Kinzer. That's something that we don't know.
that's right, but it's something we need to consider.
Yes,
Yes.
and last year, what we did in the process, we went ahead and passed a budget, and once we got the state's numbers, we had to go back and then amend our budget, once we got those figures.
Yeah.
But last year, I don't think we actually got that information until
It was
like
later.
mid-May,
Yeah.
before we actually knew what our state budget was gonna be. So right now, all we really know is based upon if everything stays constant, and there are no increases. But last year, once we knew that those increases were coming, then we went back and amended as to what we were going to use that funding for.
And that's the problem with school budget funding that every school system across the state is now going through. We're doing all of this And while the governor is also doing his budget, and by the time his budget is approved, we may have to, all the school systems across the state may have to go back and re-amend their budgets because we're doing this at the exact same time.
But what we've seen tonight, the only thing that any increase is just the normal step raises that teachers receive. There's no percentage, no
Yes.
anything allocated for teachers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that figure, we always put that at the top of the Keys budget. That figure is about $720,000 a year.
Mr. Moore?
I just wanted to, I noticed from the packet that's in the, on the voting website, can we make sure we keep getting the latest documents, because some of the numbers were different
Sure.
from what you were showing here to what's in that. I just want to make sure I got the latest numbers to play with as we're going through this.
I thought we had uploaded the most recent documents as of this afternoon, so.
Well, they were slightly different. Enough that I was confused as Mr. Bates was going through the numbers.
Ms. Kinzer, do you have some additional questions?
No, I don't.
All right. If there's no other questions, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.